Hey man,
How's it going, Mario?
how are you? Good, good, good.
Wondering, I'm still trying to wonder what the US-Israeli strategic plan is, but maybe we will come to one.
Please, where are you at with that with the thought process? Because this is probably the question I ask, and then anyone that's listening to my interviews will probably get annoyed me asking that question all the time. Is why? Because I think that answers a lot of the other questions. How far will they go? Will they send troops? How will that look like afterwards? How will the Gulf look like? So the why matters a lot, and I'll tell you where I'm at, and I'll get your thoughts because it's just the thing I think about the most. Um, you know about my theory about the Strait of Hormuz gives Trump more leverage. That plays a bigger role. So Trump wants to control the Strait of Hormuz, massive leverage towards China. Why now? Obviously, they saw the regime as being weak. Why I can't answer is why did they think that was even a good idea? Knowing historically that regime change operations don't work without troops on the ground. Please explain. Like, what am I missing here? Is the regime weaker than I think? Because people are talking about how the regime is exceeding expectations, still striking the Gulf. We saw the strikes today on the energy infrastructure, and yesterday, today they struck Haifa, and that's we're at day 21 in this war. So, what am I missing here? When you put the depleted munitions of the U.S., the country's debt, the fact that regime change operations don't work without troops on the ground, the fact that Iran, the regime is very ideological and decentralized, so it's designed to withstand something like this, and they're prepared for it for decades. And we've seen them sustain attacks as we saw in the 12-day war. So that we should know, when I say we, the US military should know their capabilities. Mossad were able to hack into their camera, the street light camera or street cameras network, and to be able to know where all the supreme leaders are and strike them in the 12-day war. Now again, I'm sure they knew what their capabilities were in terms of missile launches, the munitions they have, and the drones. So what am I missing here?
I don't think you're missing anything particularly significant or different to what a lot of people are. I understand your strategic vision, that maybe this is all about China, but I personally have deviated away from that because I just don't think such a strategic plan is reflected in the behavior, the day-to-day behavior and comments of the administration. I'll base my answer or whatever initial thoughts in one specific example. So that massive energy field that the Israelis hit just yesterday or whatever in the past 24 hours, that is not something that the Americans wanted, and it's not something that most people would think is a good idea, right? It causes too much collateral damage. There's too much overspill and risk to others, to third parties. So what that demonstrates to me, and this is something that I've been hearing from colleagues in Washington that I know from my time there, is there is a growing divergence between Tel Aviv and Washington. Now, does that mean that they don't have the overall desire for regime change or a different Iran? Let's just call it that. No, but I think that they are going about it two very different ways. And even after 3 weeks, this idea of being able to control the Strait of Hormuz is, well, I used to think it was absurd, but now I think it's farcical, right? It's about as idiotic as I think is possible. Because even if the Americans can muster up some kind of entity, right, some group, or $200 billion, which I think was reported in the Washington Street Journal a few hours ago, $200 billion, that's more than the entirety given to Ukraine, which was 180 or something, right? So we're talking about one single figure for this unexpected conflict, which has lasted 3 weeks, versus the entirety of amount provisions given to Ukraine over 4 years. And that was in incremental amounts, and with all the political toing and froing that we've seen, right, over the administrations Biden and Trump. So this is this is a serious investment the Trump administration seemed to have now. They are in this. But as far as I can tell, there doesn't seem to be a convincing enough illustration that it is going well, or at least going. Trump says they're ahead of schedule. By what metric? What, you've killed more IAGC officers? You've taken more infrastructure out? What does that mean exactly? It's very hard to quantify or to understand what this means. And this isn't just me as a sort of centrist kind of person being critical of Trump for that sake. It's simply anyone, be them right-leaning in the US political spectrum, or obviously anti-war left-leaning. I know you had Aaron Mate on earlier, right? Everyone is like, what is this about? So I think the Strait of Hormuz is, well, actually, I'll take a step back and then I'll hand it back to you. But simply, what was it a couple of weeks ago, 10 days ago? The chaos, energy, focus was around putting the Kurds involved and arming the Kurds. Suddenly that is put on the back burner. I haven't really heard much about that in recent days. And now it's about the Strait of Hormuz.
A statement was made. You saw the statement by, just quickly on the Kurds, did you see the statement made by the Kurdistan Freedom Party? They released a footage urging Kurdish forces to unite against Iran. That was earlier today, holding an American rifle, US-made rifle. Didn't catch the news. Not many people were talking about it, but that video came out a few hours ago.
Well, I mean, sure, you're going to have these political moments, demonstrations, or sort of rally round the United States, rally round freedom, rally round the flag kind of thing. But I'm not seeing, it comes back to, I don't like to be boring, but I'm pragmatic about it. And as far as I can tell, where are the defections? Where are the desertions in the broader Iranian system, right? And I want to reiterate that I'm all for the government being different or for the people having greater choice, but this is not how you go about achieving it. And the bottom line I would say before I do, we can shift gears, is simply, if this was something that the Trump administration wanted to do, take the Strait of Hormuz, securitize the Strait of Hormuz, why didn't they communicate beforehand with allies and partners? If they had given them a heads up, part of the reason I'm so angry about that from a European perspective is not because I think Europe is suddenly the best thing ever and can hold its own and stuff. No, I'm realistic about what Europe can do. But I just think it's incredibly disrespectful to treat your allies and partners like that, speak to them, insult them, threaten them, and then expect them to come to your support, risking assets, risking money, risking lives for something that they were not just not consulted about, but just like, hey, heads up, guys, we're going to go to war with Iran. I think that's a pretty, shitty thing to do. So where was the plan for that? Where is the scenario planning for that? And ultimately, why are they asking for $200 billion if they didn't already have this all planned in the first place, right? They would have asked in advance and done all this, but they don't act like that. So I have very little confidence.
But how does that? But what I don't understand is that with everything you said, why you're veering away from the? There you go. Iran just launching more ballistic missiles on Israel. I
thought Israel said that they had destroyed them all. Or was that production?
Yeah. Why are you veering away though from the theory that, like, for the US to spend $200 billion on or to request $200 billion to alienate allies? The reason Trump was asked, why don't you tell your allies? He was asked by a Japanese reporter. He's like, of course I'm not going to tell you. Have you heard of the element of surprise? You Japanese should know it. Look what you did you didn't warn us about Pearl Harbor. That was Trump's answer. But, it's a valid point. You'd want the element of surprise in an attack like this. But if you add the insult to allies, the jeopardizing of the relation with the Gulf countries, the stockpile munitions, which we haven't talked about, which is a very significant concern, and the $200 billion allegedly requested. If you put all these together, for Trump to do all this, so for the US to do all these things that are harmful for debt, harmful for allied relations, harmful from a strategic perspective, there must be in it something. There must be something significant in it for them. And the only explanation I have is the Strait of Hormuz. If anything, the list of things you've given me that show how this was, this is foolish in so many ways, only makes sense because the Strait of Hormuz, controlling the Strait of Hormuz is just so valuable
It is.
for Trump, for the US long term.
No,
So that's why
no...
it even makes more sense now, because there's no other explanation. There's no way they'd want $200 billion, alienate allies, do all that for nuclear weapon threats, which we know that it's not there, or because Israel asked us to. Like the other explanation is just, it just don't add up.
What are you trying to get at, or what's your question?
It's now I'm more convinced than ever as to Strait of Hormuz. Like when there's discussions of boots on the ground, Trump just, is I was going to say just killed his chances in the midterms, but is harming his poll numbers months before the midterms. Number one, number two's harming. The 100% one.
They were 40% or something. I don't know, minus 40 or something. Anyway, sorry.
Oh, really? Hold on. Poll numbers went up.
Well, I mean, by a couple percentage points, but I think it was Spectator Index.
I did it.
I don't know. Get your team to check it, but I saw that on Twitter. Anyway, go on.
I'll check. But so poll numbers are going to take a hit. Midterms, the odds of them winning the midterms or the Democrats having a sweep there, it was like 30%. Now it's up to 49%. A Democratic sweep in the midterms. And then U.S. debt has skyrocketed, and Trump has always been talking, especially through Doge, etc., of cutting costs, reducing the debt. And he's been building his reputation as being the peace president. That's gone. Ending forever wars. That's gone. Keeping oil prices low. That's gone. So reputationally, he's been hit on so many levels. But if he wins the Strait of Hormuz, everything else becomes irrelevant or a lot less important, because he's just achieved the biggest strategic win for the US in I don't know how long.
Are you a gambling man, Mario?
No.
Because that's a very big gamble to make for Trump. That's a rhetorical question. But what I mean by that is simply, I mean, yes, if he could, let's run with your theory, right? If he could effectively control the Strait of Hormuz, then yes, a lot of these other limitations, shortcomings would be improved. I don't think anyone can categorically say that simply by controlling the Strait of Hormuz, you guarantee that, his poll ratings increase or the economy. That's, a high probability, because he could effectively control oil supply, weaken China, undercut Russia, bolster relations again with the Gulf, improve, stability for Europe, all this sort of stuff. Sure, that would be very incredible, but it screams in the face to me of Trump as a person. I don't think he's that altruistic, I don't think he's that selfless or that big picture considering of other people like that. I think he just wants to control the Strait of Hormuz because it benefits the US and hang everybody else.
Agree.
Now, to do this, let's be pragmatic again. So what does he actually need to do? The Strait of Hormuz, as you know, being based in that area, it's not a big stretch of water. It's quite narrow. It's very busy, and it's right on the border with Iran. So you are going to be at risk from the mainland. We don't know what the stockpile situation is for the Iranians. So they may well, and also because the ability to produce drones, Shahed drones, is insanely easy. It's $20,000 versus one interceptor, which is 4 million, right? So that's a 200%, 200% times, production cost difference. Not to mention, I did a video on my channel earlier about Russia and what the situation is for Russia. Some people saying there was an attempted coup in Russia, which I don't think is the truth. But the point is that no, there isn't. But people, basically, they're cutting internet. And it's becoming, you'd be the first to know. I reached out to you first. We'd be doing spaces like we did with Wagner in 23. But good times, right? But no, I personally, I think, Russia could continue to support production of Shahed drones as well for the Iranians. So point being is that this is going to be very difficult for the Americans to escape or to avoid being hit by these drones. So that makes their Navy assets incredibly at risk. Therefore, you then have to put boots on the ground, probably, because you have to destroy or take over those relevant bases, facilities, compounds, etc. Places where these missiles and threats projectiles are coming from. But that means you then become absolutely entangled in the war, and it completely changes the idea that this is a conflict that will be over in, I don't know, what has Secretary Hexeth said, a few weeks, a couple months. Completely changes the time horizon and the war the war game. So to me, you could do it, but that means maybe that's what the 200 billion is for. But that means a multi-year potential conflict, unless Trump literally just gives up. Because there's no other way
Holy
to
shit.
actively no, but there's no other way to realistically, if you think about it, there's no other way to realistically control the Strait of Hormuz. You have to literally control the entire coastline. You have to control the strait itself. And to be honest with you, this kind of undermines Trump's vision, right? They've laid out in the security strategy back in October, November, saying about China, saying about Venezuela, about Western Hemisphere, right? That kind of is contradicted with this, because Trump would have to commit so many military assets and finance and focus to this area that he wouldn't be able to control the US and his near abroad and the Western Hemisphere, and it would be a benefit for China if they want to invade Taiwan.
Did Trump just essentially make the decision to give up on Ukraine, give up on Taiwan, and just focus on Iran? Because he's already shown, willingness to. He's already talked about different countries having their own sphere of influence. So people already assume that might mean Trump is moving away from Ukraine and China and just focusing on American strategic interests. I wouldn't think so, because Taiwan is so important for the US economy. So I kind of take it back there. But then how would you explain pulling out THAAD batteries from South Korea? And depleting your munitions? If you're taking the Chinese threat seriously, why would you deplete your munitions to a level where it would take years to get them back to the same levels?
Precisely. I mean, this speculation, look, I study China and Taiwan quite a lot. I'm not pretending to be an expert of Chinese history or anything like that. But from the time that I focused on China in a great power political sense, that's my master's focus, is that China has had this desire to reincorporate Taiwan as part of what Xi Jinping calls national rejuvenation. They had the century of national humiliation, which was because of the Opium Wars, and then the run up until Mao, and then the Great Leap Forward. But as part of this, Taiwan is the centerpiece. So there is, strong belief that China under Xi wants to retake Taiwan. Now, if you look at the military situation for China, it varies a little bit. They had a big purge in January, which no one really paid too much attention to because of Venezuela and everything and the Iranian protests at the time, but it was a big deal. They purged some of the most senior political military staff of the PLA, or the People's
the head of the army. I think the head of the army was purged as well. No,
well, he was the main one. But the point I'm trying to make is that simply you don't do that, and you don't go through this quite uncharacteristic political turbulence in the CCP if you're planning a bigger invasion. So while I think a Taiwan's operation campaign is possible, I don't think it's imminent. And so maybe Trump has gambled, again to use that word, on the idea of trying to take out Iran quickly enough to deal with China in sort of 29 or 28. Or
to use Iran to deter China from invading Taiwan. Because if Trump threatens China to choke off their energy if they invade Taiwan, that could actually give him leverage and avoid a Taiwan invasion. Just an idea there as well, because controlling the Strait of Hormuz, assuming he's successful, gives him leverage. But one question on that front, though, is what happens to energy prices then? If we are going to see a prolonged war, if we're going to see potential boots on the ground, if Trump wants to control the Strait of Hormuz, Iran may mine it, may sink a few ships and block it. Netanyahu already commented about replacing the Strait of Hormuz with pipelines that go through to Israel, to the Israeli port.
How convenient for him. I'm sure he did.
Exactly. What a coincidence. But what happens to energy prices, and how can this be a prolonged war if Iran could keep the Strait of Hormuz closed? Can the world economy sustain a closed strait?
Well, I'm going to be having a small plug, but I'm going to be having a chat with Martin Wolf of the FT next week. He's the chief foreign economics correspondent. No, a nice guy. We had him on before, but he's already written about what the hell this would mean if prices go to sort of, 300. But he also does the comparison, and some other people who watch Russia, as you know I do, keep in context the prices when war in Ukraine fully took off after Russia's invasion. They've jumped to 600 price level. So we're still at a fifth right now. You know, your title is oil prices touch 120. 4 years ago and a bit, $600. Insane high. And the impact of that, as well as COVID, has meant that we've got this heightened level of inflationary pressure. Price levels have remained much higher. Overall, therefore, you do economics as well, right? We've never really come back down to sort of pre-COVID levels. And this is the problem. It keeps that sustained level for much longer. So if this is going to be a proper protracted conflict, then that risks pushing food prices, energy, gas, whatever it is, we as consumers on the receiving end, as individuals, households, much, much higher, sustained higher. And that I'm not sure is sustainable. You know, plenty of economists I've spoken to have said that we're entering a period of potential global stagflation, right? Stagflation is when you have sustained inflation, but no growth or whatever. So it's the worst possible thing. Imagine it's what happened after the OPEC crisis of 1973, when you had that crazy global shock to oil supply and energy, and then much of the 70s, at least for parts of Western Europe, were characterized by stagflation. So I don't know how well the global economy can manage that. Trump has run on this platform, aside from anti-immigration or America First and Forever Wars, a lot of the things you mentioned. He's also, run on the platform that I will fix the economy that Biden destroyed, and Sleepy Joe and all that stuff. But this is not, it goes in the face of a lot of what he said. So I just don't really understand, even if I just objectively, forget my criticisms of Trump, I don't really understand what the logic is here, unless they think they can literally get a quick sweep in and destroy the regime or system and change it, and somehow bring it around to US interests and preferences. I don't really understand where they're trying to go with this. So, yeah.
How much influence we're talking about the Asians, and we're talking about all these European allies, though. What say do they have in all this? Like, how far could the US go unanimously? We've been talking about it with Ukraine. How much influence do the Europeans have? Well, they've stepped up. To what extent up for interpretation?
Do you mean in a military sense or a diplomatic sense? Or when you say go
both.
to, how could they
both.
go?
I think both are very, very intertwined. Like being able to convince the US to stop this war, for example. Like the US is the Asian economies are suffering the most. Europe is followed by that, by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So why can't they go to Trump and say, hey, you know what? We can't accept this, and come together or join forces, say we want you to end this, or we will retaliate economically with doing X, Y, Z. Why do we never see it the other way around? Why is it always the US doing it to other countries?
That's not strictly true. The Europeans, again, it was kind of overshadowed by everything else that's been happening since January 1st. Goodness me, it's only been 3 months. The Europeans were getting ready to retaliate against American tariffs. I forget the mechanism it's called. I think it's like Article 25 or something. They have a clause in the European constitution. I can't remember. Basically, they've got a tactic. Macron has mentioned it before, where they can basically sanction a hell of a load and tariff a hell of a load of US assets if they want to. But they haven't used it. I think it's called the last option or something. I can look it up when you're talking, but basically they didn't. The European Union is still a force to be reckoned with economically, even if it doesn't grow at the rate that America does. I think that's this is the MAGA.
But why can't they end the war though? Why can't they come with Japan, South Korea, the Gulf, and just end the war?
Well, because they didn't. It's not.
But can't they pressure Trump? Don't they have enough influence over? No, but it's the war that's impacting them the most. The Gulf nations are getting annihilated economically. Asia's following them. South Korea, Japan is, we're seeing videos of people lining up at the gas stations, and then Europe is already struggling. So you put all of them together. Why can't they go to the US and just say, you know what, we want you to end this?
because the instrument, that's a very difficult question to answer, because you can't just flip a switch and it's done. I mean, the internet, this is why America is as powerful as it is because it's effectively, it's purposely created the Bretton Woods, the UN, all the entire economic system, the reserve currency, all this stuff is geared around the United States. And so to do that, you have to decouple from it. You have to completely and basically re-engineer the entire international order. That's why people get so excited about BRICS, because they think it's China, Russia, South Africa, China, Brazil, and India, and BRICS Plus now, re-engineering the system, right? De-dollarizing, delinking from America. But that takes time. That's why I've never been a hardcore, me and Kim.com in the old days of your show would be battering each other with our opinions because, I don't disagree with the idea of BRICS, but it's not something that has the potential right now. To completely usurp the US system requires an unraveling of it, not just by America's own destruction, but by countries delinking, right? The Russians, the Chinese have been doing this. They do more bilateral trade on commerce in their respective currencies. Gold is used more, Bitcoin, obviously, or CMDCs, I think, is being. But to simply say to the Americans in the context of Iran, you guys got to stop this, there's not much that they can do. Realistically, America is the undisputed military power of the world, and whether we like it or not, we can't do anything about that. China is getting more powerful, it's getting bigger, but it still only has, relative to the United States, two bases. America has over 800. Okay, they're leased or have agreements.
Smaller ones, yeah.
Yeah, so outposts, all that sort of stuff. Point being is that, realistically, what could they do? Well, they can sanction America. They could stop trading, boycott. They could increase tariffs. And I think that one of the biggest things that you could see having an impact is just sidelining America in certain things, not necessarily in the context of Iran, but more in the context of sidelining America with trade and engagements, right? So boycott the FIFA World Cup, or what Mark Carney has been suggesting doing in banding together middle powers, right? So Europe works together close with Canada, Australia, South Korea, Japan, etc., etc. But again, none of these things are going to forcibly mean the United States changes course. So I don't think
if this prolongs, we were just talking offline about the Gulf and how that's looking. If this prolongs, if this war continues, and if we do see boots on the ground, we saw how Iran retaliates. They've struck the Gulf Energy when their gas plant was struck yesterday, pretty extensively. And there's now missiles. The missiles I told you about that Iran fired, all they had cluster munitions, so they landed in Israel with cluster munitions while you were speaking. So that shows Iran's capabilities. How does the Gulf look like if this goes on? What is the new Gulf like? Can they regain their economic powerness? Can they regain the safety they've always had when they have Iran on their borders?
Well, that was the thing I was actually going to say. Thank you for reminding me. I think Saudi Arabia is a particularly critical component factor because of the petrodollar, right? This unique relationship that the Americans have with, it's predominantly Saudi Arabia, but any country that relies on oil and the petrodollar, right? So for them, they have a particularly strong card that they could play to try and get the Americans to rein in their actions. I don't know fully how the GCC feels about this. On the one hand, they obviously welcome the opportunity to get rid of the Islamic Republic, make Iran more constructive or just a weaker player. But on the other hand, obviously this war has led to widespread disruption and destruction of their facilities, of their livelihoods. What UAE has done with, trying to incentivize people to come back by saying that you won't be taxed, I think, anywhere, or whatever the headline was in the FT. So in my opinion, I think that they are quietly pretty critical of the US for starting this. Obviously, they're angry as hell about the Iranians and their reactions. But that's the point. Iran is responding to the decision of the Americans to launch this operation. So I think the GCC countries are in a difficult predicament right now, because they want the end game with Iran to be different, but I think they're also cognizant of the fact that it's difficult to see how, unless the regime literally shows absolute signs of implosion, which, you know, we see ahead of a department.
We may see that. We may see that. We might see suddenly it doesn't. What was the word? There's a saying. It collapses slowly, but suddenly, something along those lines. Like it seems stable. Everyone's talking about it collapsing. Looks fine. And suddenly one day we saw that with Assad. We saw that even with Wagner. Obviously, it's a failed mutiny, but out of nowhere they've managed to march all the way to Moscow.
It's a slow
exactly. So there's still a potential in that. Yeah, and Israel keeps talking about how we know they're striking besieged checkpoints with their drones, and they keep killing their leaders. And Netanyahu in the speech today said the regime is crumbling, is going to crumble from within. People could rise up. I don't think it's true, but obviously we don't know. I'm sure even Israel doesn't really know. The US doesn't really know for sure. But I think that makes a big difference. And we may see a scenario where the regime does crumble, the US does get hold of the Strait of Hormuz, and it ends up being an incredible win, long-term strategic win for the US and for Trump. That is still a possibility, even though it looks very bleak right now. For me, I just want to see anything that leads to the war coming to an end. Pyotr, absolute pleasure as always. Thank you for doing this. And I'm sure we'll be doing it again, but hopefully there'll be something more positive to talk about, maybe some sort of peace deal, some 20-point plan peace deal to talk about, rather than just another step on the escalation ladder being crossed.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to know where we go from here. I don't see this wrapping up anytime soon, even though, like you, I would like it to. And generally speaking, I think that the Israelis have an intent to keep this going for a lot longer than simply, I don't know. I think the Trump administration are trying to find, indicate off-ramp, and then they pull out another card because the Israelis sort of encourage them to do so. So I would watch that bilateral relationship quite a lot. And hopefully we can co-stream again and do it soon. But as always, it's a pleasure to join you. And thanks for everyone watching.
Thank you, Pyotr.